if your whole life revolves around winning,
Right.
and being the top athlete of your respected sport, and you don't have much else, or if you don't have other hobbies or things that you're interested in, or whatever it is, I think
Right.
those are all factors that largely creep into those people's minds in a negative way.
I'm excited for you to see this week's episode, but before we get to that, I have a message for you. If you're a parent of an elite athlete or a coach of a high performing team and you're looking for some help or assistance with making them more mentally resilient, perform with more confidence, be more consistent, anything like that, then this is for you. I have an 8-week program all designed to address exactly that, to help your athlete be at their best on a more consistent basis and not get tripped up by those little voices in their head and getting down on themselves for mistakes, but performing like we know they can. So, what I want you to do is don't delay, just grab a time on my calendar through this link, and let's set up a time to talk about your specific situation and how what I'm offering in my 8-week program can help. Okay. So it's brindrescher.com/free consultation. So click this link, grab a time on my calendar. I look forward to talking to you. And now on to this week's episode. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Mental Advantage podcast. Today, we have a guest from the world of winter sports, something we don't see too often here in California, although I've heard there's snow in the mountains. We have Steve Fisher. He is an amazing snowboarder, but as we talk about, Steve and I have had countless conversations. He's also just an amazing person. How are you doing today, Steve?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So, one of the things I always like to talk about in the beginning is just to find out your origin story. We'll get into obviously the accolades and the heights that your career went to so that all of our listeners and viewers, since this does also post on YouTube, can get to know the career arc. But
hmm
how did you get started in snowboarding? And were you just born into it? Did your parents put you on a snowboard pretty early, or was it something that you had to kind of, convince them?
Um, I think it was a pretty standard, young child, very obsessed with sports at an early age. I grew up in St. Louis Park, Minnesota, which is a suburb of Minneapolis. So growing up in the 80s at that point was a very kind of fresh time for a lot of alternative sports, I guess you would say.
Hmm.
Growing up, a lot of friends of mine obviously were big into team sports. I was big into team sports, and I had a neighbor who was very into like skateboarding and snowboarding. And being an impressionable, 5, 6 year old back in the early 80s, I really kind of gravitated towards that sport, that style, largely because of my neighbor. And, my parents kind of took note of that, and they got me a subscription to one of the snowboarding magazines when I was a child.
Wow.
And I was really, really enthralled with, just kind of the visuals of the sport and the look of everybody who was in the magazines, who were professionals at the time when it was, still a very new sport, early 80s. And, I really kind of gravitated to it. And my parents were ultimately extremely supportive. They,
Great.
didn't stop me from doing anything like that. They weren't, questioning of, the caliber of person who was participating at the sport at the time, because at that time it was, really kind of counterculture. Snowboarders were very much looked at as riffraff in the community for, whatever reasons. And here I was 5, 6 year old trying to get involved. So, they really did everything they possibly could to get me involved and on the right kind of club programs that help facilitate growth and, opportunity to get into competitions and all that sort of thing.
Nice. That's great.
Yeah.
It's great to hear when parents are supportive because, you hear so many stories of parents sort of being like, I don't know, is that safe? So great. They got you a subscription. Thinking
Yeah.
back to this magazine, because I'm just curious, who were it was counterculture, but who were the names? I mean, because I know Tony Parker's a big name in skating. I know Shaun White it is, but you might predate him or around the same time. So tell me who your hero was in that regard.
Yeah, so at the time, again, it was very new. So, Jake Carpenter, who founded Burton Snowboards, was very much a pivotal figure in the sport. Tom Sims, another kind of godfather of the sport, who started Sims Snowboards, were two guys that, I gravitated to as far as athletes go who again, half pipe competitions at that point were very, very fresh, very new, and still kind of coming into themselves. So Craig Kelly was a enormous name and another kind of godfather type athlete in snowboarding. Terry Hawkinson, who again was at the time pioneering a lot of the freestyle aspects of the sport. Terry Kidwell, who was kind of in the late 70s, early 80s, was another half pipe and freestyle kind of pioneer person who were very big at the time. But then, the interesting thing that happened was freestyle snowboarding really exploded on a very rapid scale. So in the beginning, there was like 5 or 6 guys that, everybody was very obsessed with. Jimmy Scott is another one who was a sport pioneer. And then in the late 80s to early 90s, it just expanded exponentially. And guys like Jamie Lynn, JP Walker, Todd Richards, just to name a few guys that were kind of in the pivotal early stages before snowboarding was inducted into the Olympics and all that sort of stuff, were guys that I looked up to immensely. Daniel Frank is another one from Norway. I could name so many, but I won't.
No, I think that I'm glad that you are mentioning these names because, obviously snowboarding is huge in certain circles. Mm-hmm. And then you have like the LeBron James, which is more of a household name. And I think it's important that we know, who are the pioneers of this sport? What does it take to get a sport to explode, right? And to catch the eye of a young Steve Fisher and be like, hey, what is this? And then all of a sudden, you get an opportunity. Because I think so many athletes maybe look at some mainstream sports, and I'm going to put that in quotes because I don't think there should be a sport that's called mainstream, but maybe more popularly or wildly, adopted, I guess, or easier to get your kids into in certain, areas. They don't maybe feel like they fit into that. So they're like, I'm not an athlete because I'm not that. And now we have skateboarding just added as an Olympic sport this year, 2021, y'all. And Tony Hawk's been doing this since around your time, right, Steve?
Yeah. Oh yeah. And he was another one who so I grew up obviously skateboarding first, and then getting into snowboarding. And Tony Hawk was a legend even back then, and it was really wild. I actually had a chance to meet him again, at a very young age. There was a good skate culture in Minneapolis, and went to the local skate parks, and he did a demo with Birdhouse skateboards back when he first started that in the late 80s. And just very cool that he's still so involved and, kind of took up that godfather role of skateboarding.
Yeah, I'm very thankful for those type of people that give people other ways, right? Because even in the business world, there's people that think there's only so many careers, and it's like you find out there's so many things that you can do. So anything that I can do to help contribute to any athlete finding their groove and, to know that anyone can be an athlete. There's so many sports now that, is great. So, yeah. Okay. So when you're thinking you're getting started, do you remember your first this could be a 2-part story, but your first snowboard experience and maybe in a competition, what was that like? What do you remember about it?
Yeah. Okay. So my first snowboard experience, I remember pretty vividly. So again, I was 5 or 6 years old in the early to mid '80s, and uh, snowboard brands and companies at the time really did not focus on youth equipment. So I kind of had to wait a year or two, and
Okay.
I got skis because I was, wanted to do winter sports, and my parents, like I said, were extremely supportive and a lot, they got me skis to at least be on for a year,
Right.
and I got a snowboard at Target, which was not a real snowboard by any
Right.
means. It was like plastic and
Right.
didn't have metal edges. It wasn't, the modern snowboards that we know today. It was literally just like a plastic press of
Yeah.
a snowboard shape that I basically, you can't turn, you just bomb the hill. So that's kind of what I learned on in year one.
Yeah.
And then Moro snowboards, which, kind of, I don't know if it necessarily really exists anymore. It's gone through a lot of transition over,
Yeah.
30 years, but they were a company that made one of the first couple boards for young children at the time. So my parents got me that. Um, and the local skate snowboard shop that we got it at was called The Alternative in Minneapolis, and they more or less kind of MacGyvered bindings for me because my feet were small, and again,
Right.
snowboard boots weren't really made for kids, so I had Sorels that they basically retrofitted these bindings to fit smaller feet.
Nice.
Um, and that was my first board and snowboard experience. I went to Buck Hill in Minneapolis and then Highland Hills in Minneapolis mostly. And, I just was obsessed.
Yeah.
I was on hill almost every day after school from, 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. because Minnesota night riding is a thing and
Okay.
what most people do. Yeah, and we have hills, we don't have mountains, and so I would go for 3 or 4 hours after school, and would have like 50 runs, because it was just that
Wow.
short, and we have rope tows and chairlifts and everything, but so I would go and I would just practice and work on turning stuff, everything, and
Nice.
before you know it, I kind of wanted to enter my first contest because, as I said, I was part of this snowboard club called Team Gilboa at the time. Now they've changed their name to G Team, but
Okay.
they, were more or less like an after-school snowboard program that never really existed in Minnesota until the mid '80s, early
Yeah.
'90s. So I would go to practice and did my first contest. I don't, really remember first contest because I was probably like 7 years old,
Yeah.
maybe eight. But I just remember the shop that helped me with the snowboard and the bindings and everything. They ran a contest series called the Upper Midwest Point Series, which was a facet of USASA, which is United States of America Snowboard Association,
Okay.
which is the largest winter sports amateur kind of contest circuit in North America. And everything just kind of escalated from there. Like I said, I just kept at it, kept going, kept practicing, and I think there was like maybe 5 or 6 events in the Upper Midwest
Okay.
in the winter, and we would go from event to event on the weekends, and they would just kind of be on little hills all around the
Yeah.
Minneapolis area or Wisconsin or Upper Peninsula, Michigan. And that's kind of how I got my start.
The
And I really,
UP.
yeah. And, I just really fell in love with the half pipe early on. And I did it all. I did half pipe, slope style, giant slalom, you name it. And that
Yeah.
was all kind of part of our team deal. And yeah, it just kind of continued to escalate as I grew older.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
I want to just summarize this. So, what we
Yeah.
have is we have an early passion and interest.
Hmm.
Well, first of all, we have an influence, right?
Yep.
So, a mentor or like your neighborhood
Hmm.
friend who was like, yo, this is a thing. And you're like, okay, I'm into this. Then,
Yeah.
your parents feed the fire of that interest. So you have
Yeah.
support, right? So you first have a mentor and
Absolutely.
influence, then you have support, then you have all of this community, right? These things that come together. So you get
Hmm.
your first snowboard from Target, but then, the snowboard world is still developing. They don't have youth sports
Yeah.
snowboards because they're trying to get the adults that are going to like be out front. And
Yep.
so this wonderful shop decides to feed your, passion, and then repetition. He's
Hmm.
out there every day feeding his passion,
Hmm.
practicing, I'm sure falling a lot.
Oh
So,
yeah.
based on my previous episode about resilience, so I love this because this is a recipe for success and just continuing and continuing and continuing and then falling in love with a particular event. I was going to ask you that, the
Yeah.
half pipe.
Yep.
And were you ever scared? I mean, I know you only had hills,
Eh.
but were you ever scared? Because the first thing I think of is like, that first half pipe run, I mean, even the skateboard ones, you don't need a
Hmm.
mountain to build a pretty decent sized half pipe. So tell
Yeah.
me, like, did you have any fear, and what is your advice to those as they get started in those particular feats?
Yeah. So I was very fortunate, and I did not have any fear at a young age. It was something that it really kind of drove me, and to use
Wow.
your own words, it fueled my fire
Yeah.
to go faster, go bigger, get higher out of the walls. Increase amplitude in that at an early age,
Wow.
and um, like I said, I was very fortunate to where I did not have any significant injuries at a young age. I fell plenty. Don't get me wrong. There was a
Oh
lot
yeah.
of falling and learning tricks and all that sort of stuff. But I was really lucky in the sense that I just wanted to go faster and go higher, and I just continued to do so until I felt very, very comfortable with what I was doing.
Nice. And is there a certain way, just this is curiosity's sake, is there
Hmm.
a skillful way to fall, or is it just you're falling?
So there is definitely a kind of a finesse element to it, and it's again, if you grow up skateboarding at an early age, and
Yes.
falling kind of becomes natural to you. And I had a very unique ability to kind of get out of uh, scary falls.
Nice.
Tuck and roll. I could, kind of maneuver so that I would minimize damage.
Okay.
And that was definitely another skill that I was taught because of snowboarding. Was if your agility level, I guess, it increases as you get older, and
Yeah.
if you kind of have it at a young age, you really know how to finesse and harness
Yes.
kind of the ways to avoid injury.
Yeah. I have gone down to Venice, which I'm sure you have been to in your
Yeah,
times visiting Los
yeah.
Angeles, because if you are any kind of person that's into skateboarding, Venice
Hmm.
Beach here in California is probably, well, in Los Angeles area, let me say that, is
Yeah.
one of the number one spots to go to because we have this fabulous skate park or skate,
Hmm.
I don't know, apparatus. And I have to say, minus watching surfers,
Yep.
and but skateboarders are probably, I mean, I would say skateboarders over surfers because, I mean, yes, danger in water, but at least you're falling. There's a way to fall in surfing, which most part you're going to be pretty safe if you know how to swim and that type of
Yeah.
stuff. Skateboarding, however, I don't think there is a sport alive that teaches you just
Hmm.
fall down, get back up, fall down, get back up any better than skateboarding. Those guys are so fearless and they just do trick after trick after trick as many times as they can and until they land it. And I love
Hmm.
that. Just watching them is just like a master class in resilience and
Hmm.
determination.
100%, and that's exactly where snowboarding came from. And snowboarding started from skateboarders who wanted to do it on the mountain, and it's that same mentality and that same learning experience that skateboarding teaches in snowboarding, and it's just applied on a snowy mountain or hill versus in the street or on a ramp or what have you. But Yeah, so I grew up learning those exact
Yeah.
elements, and that's kind of what,
Yeah.
keeps me going today.
Yes, absolutely. Skateboarding. I was going to ask you, was skateboarding because I always, does surfing come before skateboarding or skateboarding come before surfing or how did that all work? But it doesn't matter. I love that was the influence for snowboarding. Okay, so I am starting to see that your mastery came from repetition, but was there a point where you recognized, like, I got something here that maybe I am a little bit more gifted than some of my counterparts? Or do you think that was just sheer hard work, determination, passion, all of that?
I think it was all those things kind of combined.
Okay.
At an early age, again, I started competing, I think, when I was about 8 years old in these local area amateur events. And very quickly, um, I had been maybe snowboarding for a year and entered these events and was top three a lot of the events. And,
Nice.
to me, that was like great and exciting. But at a young age, you're not really like, oh, yeah, this is what I'm going to do with the rest of my
Right.
life,
Yeah.
yada, yada, yada. So for me, it was just exciting and it was a great thing. And, it feels good to be second place, first place, third place, whatever. But, I have a very vivid memory of one of the first events that I won. Was a slope style or half pipe. It was one of the two freestyle events,
Okay.
and I won. And the age category was 12 and under. And this kid who was a few years older than me, so I think I was 8 or 9, and the kid that was 12, who was kind of like the big man on the hill at the
Right.
time, and everybody knew was a good rider. I beat him, and I will never look like the look on his face when they called his name second place was shock, like
Yeah.
complete and utter shock. And I was like, oh my God, crazy. I wonder what, and
Yeah.
then they called my name for first place. And I was just like, whoa, okay. um, so that was kind of my first like experience winning in a
Yeah.
freestyle event. And I feel like that it was interesting because that was kind of a precursor for the rest of my career as far as me getting better and winning events and beating people who others thought were much higher level than
Much
I.
higher.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
just kind of always had this weird underdog kind of aspect to my life.
There's an advantage to I call it the underdog advantage. I know this is called the
Yeah,
mental advantage podcast, but obviously all the eyes are on him. All the eyes are expecting him to win. So everybody's sort of ignoring you and just kind of
yeah,
like, oh yeah, he's there. But it at least allows you to fly under the radar for a certain segment of your career until you become
totally.
the person that everybody's chasing. Then you get the feel of what it is to be on top on the regular.
Yeah, and I think for me, I definitely thrive on the underdog aspect
Nice.
versus the top guy. So like that's as things progressed, I always tended to do much, much better when people were not paying attention to me. Yeah.
That's good. Okay, what I want to know is, were you playing other sports? Because I know club can, you
Mhm.
said four to, right. So I'm assuming there's no other sports involved. Or as you get older, there's, school sports now, right? They're starting to
Yep.
add sports as you go to junior high and high school. Was anyone trying to pull you anywhere else? Or was it like, at some point, when did you make the shift to be like, nah, this is all I'm doing? I'm not doing the regular high school sports, even though
Yeah.
your
So
friends might be doing it.
right. So I actually continued to grow up playing most sports as a kid.
Wow.
I played hockey again, very young age for years and years. Just youth
Yeah.
club hockey, whatever, and then that was happening during snowboarding. I was also on a lot of soccer teams and
Okay.
such through elementary school and junior high. Um, and I played football in sixth, seventh grade. I really did it all. I played basketball as a youth,
Okay.
very competitively. So I really didn't like focus on one thing entirely until probably about high school when I was still playing soccer, in ninth grade, maybe, I think was the last year, maybe 10th grade. I can't remember. But, and then, ninth or 10th grade was, I think, kind of when the travel schedule and started competing at more professional level events in ninth and 10th grade. So
Gotcha.
the travel schedule was starting to become cumbersome and didn't really allow for, the high school sports thing on that high level.
Yeah.
I do remember the high school hockey coach tried to get me to play for a couple of years, and I was just like, the seasons are the same. I
I
can't,
can't. Right. Exactly. I got to
Um,
choose.
exactly. So I chose snowboarding. And again, it wasn't, for me, it was always a huge dream to become a professional snowboarder. But, I guess in my mind, it really wasn't like a real reality until
Right.
probably I was like junior year of high school
Okay.
or senior year of high school when I started making finals at professional events and,
Nice.
cracking top tens and that sort of thing. And that was
Nice.
really wild. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely a mental trip for a, teenage kid in Minneapolis who's competing against all these guys from, big mountain areas who, again,
Yeah.
like I said, were, massively popular snowboard athletes who I followed and looked up to and idolized.
Wow. Okay. So I
Yeah.
want to get there for sure because I want to talk
Yeah.
about the first time you had to compete against the guy you were reading about in the magazine. But
Yeah.
before we go there, I love how the demands of a sport can sometimes force you to choose, right? So in
Hmm.
but I want to know what, if anything, do you give credit to these other sports giving you that maybe you took into snowboarding? Because there's a lot of talk about the benefits of a multi-sport athlete,
Hmm.
in that, sometimes the speed of a basketball drill can help you in soccer or vice versa, or, whatever. And I'm like, well, there's no running in snowboarding, at least I don't think so. I could be
Yeah.
wrong. But what do you feel like, if anything, would you give credit to those other sports for helping you as an athlete in an individualized sport?
Right. Yeah. I think, just all sport fundamentals play a huge role no matter what it is, and again, the repetition, the falling, the getting back up, um, in basketball, the dribble drills help you be more comfortable dribbling with the
Yeah.
ball, and hockey, same thing with the puck, and with snowboarding, it's similar but different, obviously, and
Yeah.
it's getting in the half pipe over and over and over again, getting comfortable, going faster, going bigger, all those things, and I think it was really, again, just the fundamentals of all sports and athletic abilities to translate over to snowboarding and
Yeah.
spill over into regular life as well. So
Okay, nice.
yeah.
Now, as you're, like you said, transcending and starting to go into the different levels and starting to be in professional level competitions, do you remember your biggest one and when you got to compete and meet one of your heroes? And what was that experience like? Did you beat him, or did you learn something? What was that experience like?
Yeah, so again, for me, it was really kind of a long progression, and I remember pretty vividly in high school being at a couple of Grand Prix events that I was getting better. I was getting better. I probably wasn't making finals yet, but
Okay.
watching guys like Rob Kingwell, Tommy Shasheen, Seth Westcott, who is a multiple Olympic gold medalist, and Todd Richards, like I mentioned, and there were just guys, so many guys around that era that were legends in their own right, and so I didn't make finals. I think it was my junior year going to a couple of those Grand Prix, but I was kind of close and getting closer
Got it.
as I did these events and people started to see me and recognize me more and more. And then the following year, I did. I think it was a triple. It was a Vans Triple Crown or a Grand Prix. I can't remember, but it was at Breckenridge, Colorado, which is where I live, and I was noticeably like feeling more confident and getting better, and knew
Nice.
that I was at least kind of getting close to final ability. Well, I made my first finals, and
Nice.
I panicked. I was super nervous. I didn't really, I just had the jitters, and I fell dropping in on my first run, and went down, did my run, and just kind of got like an okay score, nothing
Yeah.
significant. But I remember going back up to the top, and a couple of those guys, Rob Kingwell specifically, was one who had just won several events the year before and was very favored to be making the 2002 Olympics at the time. I think this was like 98 or 99.
Yeah.
And he came up to me and he was just like, "Hey man, I see you're riding super well. I know you're super nervous, but you did all the hard work, like you got to the finals and you just need to have fun." And I
Yeah.
remember another, Tommy Shashin was part of like a cluster of three dudes who came over and just kind of like tried to settle me down a little bit, and it worked. And landed the run and ended up in like fifth or sixth place.
Nice.
So, and that was kind of my first high level, finish for a pro level event, and it was beyond exciting. I probably couldn't sleep for a day or two, and was just super excited and felt like, yeah, this is it. This is for me. I can continue.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. A couple of things that I want to highlight in that story. One, that a lot of times we work really hard to get somewhere, and then when
Hmm.
we get there, we're like, "Oh, ish, like I've got to do this now." So like that
Hmm.
nervousness sets in of like, I just, one of these days I'm going to make a final. Then you make a final, and you feel like, "Oh my god, am I ready?" Right? That's when imposter syndrome sets in, and you're like, "Oh my
Totally.
gosh, like." I'm literally running against the guy who, is favored to be in the 2002 Olympics. So sometimes you
Yeah.
can make that moment so big.
Hmm.
And, kudos to those guys for recognizing that they saw, like, and that's the thing, your work speaks for itself. I love that they were like,
Yeah.
"Hey man, we've been seeing you, you're doing the work." Like,
Hmm.
that's how you get your heroes noticed, not necessarily by, dropping in their DMs, but like,
Right.
putting in the work and being at the competitions, and they see you working, and they have, that's, you earn their respect a lot that way. And then they
Yeah.
gave you the words of encouragement and have fun. Hello.
Yeah.
Like, we're so tense, and it's all about relaxation. And that's a hard
Hmm.
thing to do in those situations. But if you can find it, that's when the magic happens, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's so important. And it's, now the world that we're living in, I mean, granted, it was still very competitive and, wanted to do well and wanted to
Yes, of
succeed and
course.
everything. However, we did not have iPhones. We did not have
Right.
social media in our pockets. We did not, I mean,
Right.
you know, Facebook was new in 2006 or
Yeah.
whatever it was. So I mean, in the late 90s and early thousands, when kind of the formative snowboarding years of competitions and going into the 2002 Olympics and contests getting bigger and bigger and more professional, if you will, it was a very, very interesting time to be a part of it all.
Yeah. I mean, I love that you were in the beginnings of it too, because it gives you
Hmm.
that perspective of like, how the sport has grown, what has
Yep.
been good, what has been lost, all
Hmm.
of the different things. Now, as you're going through this progression, you're making your first final, and maybe you're starting to see more finals, and you're starting
Hmm.
to maybe, rub shoulders more with the people that you admire. When does the first, and maybe for the viewers and listeners that don't know, sponsorship is the way that you fund a lot of amateur sports, like, or maybe professional. You'll have to
Yeah.
correct me on that.
Yep.
Snowboarding, but when does that start to happen, or is there something bigger that comes before that sponsorship that you think we should highlight before we go there?
No, you're dead on. So the way that snowboarding and skateboarding works largely is that it's not organizationally funded the same way that mainstream sports
Right,
are. So what we have is individual sponsorships with endemic companies, meaning snowboard companies,
right,
people who make the equipment and or outerwear and goggles and all that sort of stuff. So Um, After that event that I just described, where I cracked the finals and I made um, a top five finish or
Yeah.
what have you, at the bottom of that event, kid you not, a marketing manager from Smith Optics, which at the time was like the goggle company next to Oakley,
Nice.
came up to me, gave me his card. He said, "Hey, I love how you ride. Like, let's talk." And 2 weeks later, we chatted, we traded some emails, and I was on the program.
Nice.
Before that, I was kind of amateur level, sponsored by a company called Ice Age Snowboards, which was a very small
Yeah.
kind of cult brand, not one of the big guys or anything, and wasn't getting paid, but was getting product
Right.
on regular and flow product kind of program, what have you. And then after I started cracking the finals, I started getting offers from companies to be paid, and that's kind of when it all really started. I'd say it was probably in like 2001
Yeah.
that I was approached by Palmer Snowboards and Head Snowboards, and at the time it was kind of faux pas for Head Snowboards because it was a ski company, but me being I think to toot my own horn a little on the more savvy side as
Yeah.
some others, I picked and went with Head Snowboards thinking, well, they're an enormous corporation. Andre Agassi is like a
Yeah.
huge
Oh yeah.
figure in
Head. Okay, I know
sports,
what you're
and
talking about. Yeah.
he's on Head, and Bodie Miller is on Heads as a World Cup skier. I think
Yeah.
so for me, seeing kind of the big picture of it all, I gravitated more towards those types of elements than being on the like overly cool type endemic snowboard brand just because. And I think that was a bit of a double-edged sword because it certainly helped me financially, but it also hurt me because of just opinions in the sport at the time of, that's not a cool brand
Right.
to be on, but the team that we had was largely European, and I was the US guy on the company, and I saw that as a great opportunity to grow and make it a long-term kind of commitment, and hopefully one day, if things go well, I can be on that Andre Agassi status.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of where things went for me.
Okay.
And
Wait.
yeah.
Before you keep going, I want to ask a
Sure.
question, or maybe highlight this for people listening. Because I think people don't really get that. Like, obviously, if you make it to the pros in a lot of sports, you're getting paid. So when you're talking
Hmm.
about getting paid, because I don't think
Yeah.
people really, have perspective, because they're thinking maybe, even like an NBA 15th guy probably gets paid more
Hmm.
than a professional snowboarder in
Oh yeah,
some
lots.
respects, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about those numbers and ballpark. You don't got to get any
Hmm.
specifics,
Yeah.
but what is a good deal? What's a bad deal? And of course, cool versus, I know it's like I think about snow skaters always being like like you said, the counterculture. So then when you go with
Hmm.
a corporation, it's like that whole like, what are you doing, man? Like, we're not selling out to you,
Yes.
man, type thing. So I can imagine the conversation. But making a good decision is a business decision is also sometimes having to go against the grain. But talk numbers and let people know like what does the average, what is the cost of a snowboard and like runs and like a season, and like why do
Yeah.
people need sponsorships? Because like we said, it's not funded like mainstream sports. So
Right. So snowboarding, like skiing, the equipment is on the expensive side. For a high quality board that you need for half pipe, which at the time in late teens, early 20s, you probably go through like 5 or 6 a year,
mm,
depending on breaking them. That's $500 to $600 a pop for a board. Um, Bindings are another $200, and then all of the other equipment, goggles, outerwear,
right,
all that stuff, is another few $100s. So
right,
to self fund is very expensive, and if you don't have a job outside of snowboarding, which most professionals don't, and
right.
I remember my first contract with Head Snowboards was somewhere in the like $20,000 to $30,000 range, I want to say.
Yeah.
And as a 19-year-old kid who doesn't own a house and doesn't have expenses related,
Right.
like that's great because
Right.
that's just one of the sponsors. And then, like I said, Smith Goggles would pay another, $5,000, and then have a travel budget on top of it to where, it was all just helping with salary and
Hmm.
travel. Um, as things progress and as you get higher and higher, I mean, there were guys that, in the late '80s, '90s, throughout 2002. I mean, Todd Richards was one that, I would say he was probably the pinnacle of snowboarding athletes
Hmm.
at that time. I mean, and he was making anywhere from like 300 to maybe $750,000 a year.
All right.
So, good money. Like, don't
Yeah.
get me wrong, it's good money. I was probably at my all time peak, was in the middle of that for a
Yeah.
handful of years.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
All right. So I think that's important for people to know because if you want to get into snowboarding, which this is another thing, I talked to Natalie about it.
Hmm.
But, we talk about like diversifying a sport and
Hmm.
how do we get more people of color in a sport that is so financially expensive to get
Yeah.
started in? What is being done in the world of snowboarding to help with that you may be aware of?
Um, so when I was young, literally nothing.
Yes.
Again, it was a counterculture kind of thing, and growing only in key kind of areas,
Yeah.
and it really wasn't a thing. And to be completely honest, there weren't a lot of people of color who were wanting to
Wanting to, right?
participate
No
at that time.
representation, right? So the
Yeah, there were a handful of kids that I grew up with. Again, growing up in Minneapolis, I
yeah,
grew up in a largely 50-50 kind of
yeah,
area, and that was Black, Asian, Hispanic, Hmong, you
yeah,
name it, all different types of ethnic communities, and they just weren't really interested in the
yeah,
way that a lot of the white kids were at that time. They were more focused on football, basketball.
right.
There were a couple of black kids in my school that played hockey, but it really wasn't a thing until I think recently. The interest has kind of peaked in a lot of those areas, and um, Burton Snowboards developed a program called Chill.
Okay.
And what they do is they are a nonprofit that basically does just this, where um, I want to say they take New York City, Boston, whatever type
Yeah,
of diversity group they're from, underprivileged, whatever you want
yeah,
to call it, that's politically correct, get them out on the hill
yeah.
and provide gear and all those things for a few weekends. There's also a another group called the Brotherhood of Skiing, which is a huge
Yeah.
black club, more or less. It's
Nice.
like it just focuses on skiing and snowboarding, and it's I believe it's a nonprofit. I think they
Yeah,
were just a group of people who loved it for a while, and then it grew and grew and grew, and now they do all kinds of
yeah,
things in California, Colorado, and out on the East Coast. But as far as I know, I think that's about it. I wouldn't be surprised if there's other
oh, I'm sure.
groups and such that
Yeah,
are doing that now.
yeah.
I
You don't
don't
know
know
all
it.
of them. That's okay.
Yeah,
I'm happy to hear that there's something, right? Because
yeah,
I know that obviously representation makes a difference, right? We're seeing
hmm,
more black swimmers, we're seeing
yep,
more black skiers, we're seeing, and other, ethnicities getting involved. And I think it was just like, it's usually access,
hmm,
knowledge, right? It's just like, oh, that's a white boy sport, or
yes,
that's for the rich people, or,
yeah,
just these labels that go on these things. But once someone gets an opportunity, like
hmm,
playing chess or something, then all of a sudden it becomes, oh my God, I love this, right? So I think
yes,
it's important for parents that are listening if you're a parent, to expose your kids to as many things as possible, because you just never know. Basketball, football, and track, or whatever other, baseball, are not the only sports that exist. And we need to, broaden our horizons as in general. And obviously, in some instances, it is a financial barrier, and it's good to hear organizations are working to close that gap as best that it can, and as programs continue to develop. So I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, and I will say, I think in a lot of mountain areas, especially now, and particularly with the outdoor industry type of brands, diversity, equity is a huge forefront of their business models. So I mean, like companies like North Face, Patagonia, and other Protect Our Winters, a nonprofit that focuses on keeping the winters cold. Are very big into the whole diversity, equity.
That's good
stuff. Yeah,
that's good. So look into those for any viewers or listeners that are interested in that. I have never personally been on a snowboard, but let's get back to your career, because it's not about me and snowboarding. I have been on skis, and cross-country skiing has got to be one of the most uncomfortable things I've ever done as far as cold. I was like, I've never been so cold in my life, but that's the closest I came to being on a snowboard. I don't even know if I've done downhill skiing, but may not be my jam. I was a runner, so, without the skis, right? Not in the winter. Well, we did run in the winter. I grew up in Chicago, so yes.
Okay.
All right. Anyway, you started to get bigger and bigger. What was, obviously the Olympics is in the future at this point. You mentioned the gentleman who was a favorite to go to the 2002. I can't help but notice there's something behind you that either you have his uniform, or you may have been there. I think you have been there, of course. But tell us about that, when it becomes like a reality that you're starting to like maybe be talked about. And like you said, you didn't know that was going to be a thing. You definitely wanted to keep doing snowboarding. But when did you start to hear like, oh yeah, we're talking about you or we're having an Olympic team or anything like that?
Right. Yeah, so this is where I think we'll kind of dive into the whole mental health aspect of sport and all that related stuff. But the guy that I was referring to earlier, his name is Rob Kingwell, and he, like me, was a great, phenomenal snowboarder who performed very well at most contests. In 2002, the team that went to the Olympics was Ross Powers, who ended up winning gold, Tommy Shishine, who ended up getting fourth, Danny Cass, who got second, and JJ Thomas, who got third. So that was our first Olympic podium sweep in the Winter Olympics, and I can't even remember how long.
Okay.
Having said that, Rob Kingwell, who was largely a favorite to go, he was one of those guys who was on the cusp also in 1998. From 1998 to 2002 was riding exceptionally well. And I think we have a very parallel type of career, because in 2002 I wasn't hitting podiums, but I was making top 10 on a regular basis. I was asked by the U.S. snowboard team that year to be on the U.S. snowboarding program. And then B, asked to forerun the Olympics. So that's the bib behind me was from the 2002 Olympics, where I foreran, which meant, I got to go and experience a lot of the things. I did not walk opening ceremonies, but I did get to ride and practice and snowboard with all the riders at the event. And I would go down before the qualifiers and the finals, essentially, and do a run, get the judges kind of warmed up as to like the riders who are now coming. So like, we got judged, but it didn't count. So that was my Olympic experience.
How was that? How did that feel? Like to be a part of that, like to be that close? Tell me about that.
It was, completely awesome. Again, at that time I was 19 years old, and Did not think that this was kind of like in, my horizon by any means. And here I was at the Olympics. My mom came and watched and bought
Nice.
tickets and everything. And it was great. And getting to know guys on the international level at that point, whom I'd already been competing against, but
Right.
were absolutely killing it and riding so well. And like I said, so Ross Powers, JJ Thomas, Danny Cass, Tommy Shasheen were the U.S. team, and then on the international circuit there was, I think, guys from Norway and Sweden, Magnus Sterner, Frederick Sterner, Thomas Johansson, just to name a few over there. Trevor Andrew was, I mean, larger than life in Canada at the time, and one of the guys who was just an incredible athlete. A guy from Spain who was very, very good on the half pipe circuit named Iker Fernandez, a guy from Finland named Alexei Litovara. I mean, and these guys were, I mean, the top of the top. And for me to be in that atmosphere and ride and have a couple of good runs while they were getting ready and, getting hyped to go compete themselves were watching. And I will kind of never forget after going back up and after my forerun and going back up and just kind of being in the atmosphere, a couple of those guys came up to me and they were just like, holy cow, man, like, you're riding so good. Like, how are you not competing? And I was just like, well, I didn't make it.
Yeah.
Because they only take 4 where, so it's really, it's a crazy thing for the Olympics because really most of the U.S. guys are in the top 10 all the time, or top 5 and then a break or a few. And everybody was kind of shifting top 3 between the international and U.S. guys. And really there were probably about 8 to 10 guys in the U.S. that should have gone to the Olympics, but weren't allowed because of the quotas.
Yeah. Has it expanded?
Nope. And I don't think it ever will because of IOC rules and USOC rules and all that political mumbo jumbo. Anywho, so that kind of leads me down the next path of, after that I get better and better and better and start winning events on a regular basis and top 3 regular basis. And, like I said, I always thrive in kind of that underdog role. And I started to have really good year before the next Olympics and was classified as a favorite to go with Shaun White and Danny Cass again. And I just mentally blew up. I couldn't, deal with the pressure. I really was too hyper focused, I think, on the performance and having to be a top 3 or 4 at every event, and it just kind of blew up in my face and I couldn't put runs together. I kept falling and, long story short, I was just too much in my own head. And that's kind of, again, funny enough, like that's how my career went. I went, 4 years riding phenomenally well and being at the top and probably a top 5 rider for 8 to 10 years. And just on the 2 Olympic cycles, that was when I would have a dip.
And that's a interesting thing that happens because people don't recognize certain sports like this where it really has its heyday at the Olympics. Some sports, like track and field at the Olympics. Yes, there's competitions all throughout the year, but the world is watching at the Olympics. Let me just be clear. So there are big competitions in snowboarding that are not the Olympics, but the world is watching at the Olympics. And so it seems like, snowboarding only happens every 4 years, or track and field only happens every 4 years, or gymnastics only happens every 4 years. No, it's happening all throughout. But if you're not in that world or dialed into that sport, very little people have that, awareness. Whether you watch the NBA finals or not, you always know when it's happening, right? So it's a little different. And so I do want to go back to something because I think you were going to tell me something about Rob as well. Were you?
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
very, very similar parallel type career where, he won the US Open. He would win Grand Prix. He would win, back at the time, there were contests called the ASTs, which is the American Snowboard Tour, and then
Okay.
Vans Triple Crowns, which were huge. X Games were huge. I mean, so there were a lot of guys in and around that time. I mean, JJ Thomas is another prime example of,
Hmm.
Danny Cass, same thing. They just, JJ got bronze at the 2002 Olympics. And then he went through a series of injuries where I think he tore his ACL and was coming back and then would perform very well, like me, going into the Olympics and then missed,
And then
and,
missed. Yeah.
it's just such an interesting thing that is so difficult that a lot of people don't understand the pressure. And everyone thinks it's like, oh, you have this glory life, you're a professional athlete, and you travel the world snowboarding. And but whether that comes from somebody sitting at a desk in a corporate world or whatever,
Right.
doing things a different way, like there's always pressure no matter what. And we put it on ourselves. And um you know people who are dedicated and ambitious and want to succeed in life, that's what it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
And um yeah, again, Danny Cass was another phenomenal athlete who actually had a lot of Olympic success. He went to two or three, I think, 2002,
Okay.
2006, and 2010. Yeah, he went to three Olympics and he got two silver medals. And another complete rock star legend of a snowboard athlete. Um, Another guy that probably people don't know the name of offhand is Andy Finch, who in my generation, kind of similar. He was a coach's discretion fourth entry into the 2006 Olympics, and he was a guy who, he was riding either completely, out of control and winning events, or he would get last place and crash and burn. And he was
Wow.
one of those guys. So it was just a huge spectrum of wildly talented people at the time. And
Yeah.
again, really during my generation of 12 plus years of professional snowboarding, I think, there was probably like 10 guys in a regular cycle of podium finishes and really big level wins. I mean, like X Games, which
Yeah.
JJ Thomas has won, Danny Cass has won, Sean White has won countless ones. I've
Yeah.
won a couple. I mean,
Yeah.
it just, and that's kind of the pinnacle of snowboarding contest world outside of the Olympics.
Is the X Games. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we know that these days, right,
Mm-hmm.
there's talk of mental health, and it's just now emerging where it's becoming popular, or
Yeah.
at least, like mainstream to talk about it, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
not at the place where we're offering the support at the level that it could, but it's getting better.
It is.
Was there anything in snowboarding at that time? And if not, how did you support yourself up until you started having these moments?
Um, so when I started, no, definitely not.
Yeah.
Towards, I think, the 2010 Olympics, or might have even been in between the 2006 and 2010 Olympics, U.S. skiing and snowboarding, USSA, that is, brought on a sports psychologist for athletes. So it was available, but it wasn't like, I mean, at least for me, I'm a very independent person. I like to
Yes.
kind of figure things out on my own. And,
Right.
it wasn't that it was a negative connotation to like talk to a psychologist about stuff or anything like
Right.
that. But I just really tried to figure things out on my own and try to get over speed bumps
Yes.
without having to have that. And, I didn't really come up with
Yeah.
anything of substance, in all honesty. And I think that's why I failed
Yeah.
for all the Olympics and wasn't able to get there. But as I'm a very easygoing, relaxed person, and I just kind of always had the opinion of, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I'm still here. I'm healthy. I'm having a great time. And, I don't really need to stress too much over this
Yeah.
in the grand scheme of things. I'm not curing cancer here. I'm not, saving lives. I really get to live a
Yeah.
dream-like lifestyle from the time that I'm 19 to the time that I'm 29.
Yeah, I mean, of course, no actual scientific evidence to back up what I'm about to say, but you never
Yeah.
know whose disease you eased by being a pinnacle of your sport. Because as those gentlemen were benchmarks for you, you became a benchmark for someone else, and just that
Yeah.
inspiration and the fire that it lights inside of you can actually do some amazing things as far as reversing illness. But anyway, I
Mm-hmm.
won't get into the specifics of that since I have no scientific backing, although there's probably some out there, not necessarily from me.
Yeah.
I want to say that, and I think it needs to be said that it's interesting. You were this amazing, and still are an amazing
Mm-hmm.
person, but amazing snowboarder. But because you didn't get to an Olympics, it becomes like this thing that feels like it's an incomplete thing, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you're winning, you're competing with Shaun White, you're beating Shaun White in some
Yeah.
instances. And yet he goes to the Olympics, gets a gold medal, and it's like he's the name, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because he's there when the world is watching, right? This is the reason
Yep.
I know Shaun White's name. Did I ever watch a snowboard competition prior to the Olympics? No.
Yep.
So it's like I don't know Steve Fisher's name because I'm not in the world of sports, but you're going, toe to toe with the guy on a regular basis. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important that people pay attention to that, because a lot of times we will measure ourselves by these major competitions. Even though you had 75 wins, it's like that one loss just
Yep.
like almost outweighs the others in your mind, if that makes sense. And so
Yeah,
yeah,
100%. And I think you're on to what I think is the difficulty of snowboarding and or skateboarding, and
yeah,
that's you brought it up earlier that mainstream sports, as we'll call them,
yeah,
baseball, basketball, football, all have massive TV contracts,
yeah,
and they are on television all the time. Um, in Europe, World Cup skiing is that over there.
nice,
And one of the things I think the mainstream sports do well is they leverage that. And World Surf League is probably the closest to like a NASCAR type
yeah.
contract with the media type stuff that action sports has, and that's what snowboarding specifically lacks, I think. And that can even snowball into why snowboarding and skateboarding kind of is the way it is because there's no revenue sharing on those TV contracts, and there's no collective bargaining agreements. There's no players unions that help benefit the athletes and riders. So instead of everybody splitting all the media revenue that goes into all these
Yeah.
events, it's individual sponsors and then contest earnings. But contest earnings are, I don't know what they're at today, but when I was there, they were anything from, $15,000 a win to $35,000 a win for like X Games. And that was like a
The
huge
pinnacle.
step
Yeah.
up from before I was a professional. I think, they were like $5,000 and $10,000 for contests.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that is really kind of challenging there is that on that podium structure and contest winnings schedule, they only pay out to like top 5. So if you're a professional athlete and you get 6th place at the X Games, you make $140, or something absolutely ridiculous for
Yeah.
the amount of risk involved, the amount that you're putting into it, and the TV coverage that you get, which largely equals if you're on TV for the X Games and they
Yeah.
show your runs and you get interviewed, it basically equates to like $50,000 of media coverage. So it's just a real severe discrepancy in, I think, what snowboarding gets
Yeah.
on the monetary scale versus a lot of others.
And I think that's important because it's like really you have to love the sport.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's I mean, you can be in it for the money, I suppose. And I mean, it can make a difference in your in
Mm-hmm.
your life, but not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily going to be funding your family's dreams off of
Yeah.
snowboarding like a basketball player or a baseball contract or something
Right.
like that, where a lot of people get involved to change their family's legacy. This is more like, I
Yeah.
love this sport and I'm
Right.
going to do.
Yeah. And to that point, I mean, like I said, on the high level, only a couple of athletes basically make league minimum
Right.
in other sports
Yeah.
type of money. And well, hey, like, don't get me wrong, that is absolutely
Oh,
phenomenal,
yeah.
and I could not be happier. But in the grand scheme, when you're comparing apples to oranges, and somebody like a Shaun White who earned $60 million after he won the
Yes.
Olympics in 2006, it just is a very steep, severe drop off.
Huh. So you mentioning that maybe gives me a little insight into why there's so much pressure on the Olympics then.
Hmm.
Because once you get the world's attention, then the sponsors are throwing money at you, right?
Exactly.
And Shaun White obviously was in the documentary, which you and I have spoke about on Clubhouse, which is where I
Mhm.
met Steve, by the way, through the amazing
Yeah.
Clubhouse. I got to connect with awesome people like Steve Fisher. And but in the Weight of Gold documentary, Shaun White,
Hmm.
even though he's, the face of American snowboarding, at least for some
Hmm.
people, I'm sure there's somebody else now, uh talks about the still the come down, right? And so even
Hmm.
with that $60 million, even with all that, he still goes through the whole process. But I think it's important to pay attention to why is Steve having challenges, or Rob, or Dan, is that his name? Dan? You said Dan too?
Uh,
Was there a Dan?
no, Danny
Dave?
Cass maybe a
Dave,
little,
Dave
but
Cass. Okay, I'm like, I was gonna say Dave, and then I was like, no, I feel like it's Dan. Dave.
yeah.
One of the reasons that they may be having what you call the yips, or in baseball or whatever, going into the Olympics, is that
Hmm.
pressure of like, not only do I need to make it on the Olympic team, but I need to medal for this
Yeah.
to be worth it, because I'm not getting paid the whole time I'm on the Olympics.
Right.
There's, maybe you still have your sponsorship, I guess, but I mean, the IOC has all these rules, and then it becomes, okay, if you win, then you get the world's attention and they're throwing money at you, but if you
Hmm.
don't, then it's kind of like, yeah, I was there and it's amazing, but so I'm glad you had the Olympic experience you did have,
Hmm.
because you didn't, I know you wanted the other one, but at
Right.
least you got to have the purity of it
Yeah.
versus the other way.
100. Yes, 100%. And being a relatively naive 19-year-old in the
Yeah.
2000 Olympic Games, yes, exactly. I wasn't monetarily focused. I didn't have, like I said, you don't have expenses as a kid. You don't
Yeah.
have to buy a house, and I was renting an apartment in Breckenridge, Colorado, for like $450 a month.
So
Like,
you were good, right?
it was totally fine. I was not concerned with that stuff. But again, as you grow and you get better and you start to reach the top, and those expenses and real life things kind of creep into your life, that's when it becomes more of a job, more of a
Yeah.
necessity to make it monetarily beneficial. And it makes it far more challenging, and that just kind of adds to the mental pressure of, oh, crap, I didn't win an event like in the last 2 weeks. I need to win one,
Yeah.
and it just kind of it changes the mindset, and it changes everything.
And to go back to, because I don't think everyone's maybe drawing this parallel, if I
Yeah.
don't win, my sponsors could drop me. So
Oh
it's
yeah.
not
Yeah.
just that. Like, I'm not going to be able to compete in my sport if I don't keep winning. So this is
Yes.
only like, whereas, and yeah, I mean, it's the same, I suppose you can say, with a, major basketball player, football player, but we all know that they have contracts at least,
Hmm.
right? And maybe they do with the sponsorships, but
Yeah.
talk to me about that. Is there a contract, or can they drop you at any time?
No, there are contracts, and it largely operates in a similar manner.
Okay.
It's just a lot of, and I guess I don't know exactly, but I'm guessing that pro athletes on organizations are on 1099s also. So it's the same deal for us.
Okay.
We're on 1099s for, like I said, like a snowboard brand, and then a goggle brand, and then an outerwear company. And
Okay.
if you're fortunate enough to get somebody like a Red Bull or Rockstar or Monster
Yeah.
Energy, and then also if you're fortunate enough to get somebody like a Chevy Trucks or things like that, and outside of the actual sport type sponsorships,
Yeah.
then that's where you're really gonna
The big
see,
money is going to come.
yeah, at least the stuff that
Okay.
is beyond what just the sport can provide. And yeah, so in a lot of those times, those contracts are like between 2 and 3 years, and they have an incentive structure, and it largely operates the same way that it would
Okay.
if you were,
So they can't
kind
just
of.
drop you because you're losing, but it's still.
They can't, but they typically will have like an injury clause type
Mm,
of get out. So there were guys during periods of early
yeah.
2000s who would have catastrophic injuries, and their sponsors would basically be like, okay, well, since you're not going to be riding for the rest of the year, we're going to pay you out for the next 2 months or 3 months, and then that's have a nice life,
When
kind
you
of.
need it the most, right? You can't
Yep,
work because you had a
yep,
catastrophic injury, and
yep.
they're like, "Yeah, well, hey, we'll support you for a couple months, but deuces," right?
Yeah, yeah, and it's pretty cold like that, and that's one of the things that I think really makes it very tough and
Yeah,
very, very cutthroat.
yeah. So, okay, I wanted to ask you a few other questions. I wanted to go back to when you couldn't mentally handle it. When did you start
Yeah.
to recognize you were putting that type of pressure on yourself? And like you said, you were wanting to figure it out yourself. And I think also just want to go back to that and say that most sports do what we call that reactive approach, right? We've got a sports psychologist here.
Hmm.
You can talk to them if you want to.
Yeah.
Athletes don't want to talk to a sports psychologist. Now it's getting better, right? It's
Yeah.
becoming more normalized, but
Hmm.
still, you have to want to talk to them. It's not like it's mandated, or not saying it should be mandated, but it should be cultural part of the team, right? I believe in a
Yeah.
proactive approach. I think we're very reactive in that way. But
Totally.
when did you start to recognize that it started to get more pressure on you, because obviously you had that first experience with your first big final and feeling nervous, and you got the advice to have fun, but when did it start to become more business and maybe less fun for you?
Yeah. So, like I said, it was definitely going into the 2006 Olympics was when it became more of a necessity for me to perform and be on that Olympic team.
Yeah.
And, again, I didn't really have sponsors per se that were of the opinion that, oh, you have to make the Olympics.
Yeah.
Everyone was rooting for me and people were supporting me, but at the same time, I've always kind of been a bit of a lone wolf, like I said, and kind of
Yeah.
trying to do things my own way and figure it out, and just kind of hyper laser focus and try to take care of the task.
Yeah.
And yeah, I still do that. It's
Yeah.
just kind of how I operate. And
Yeah.
going through it, I remember the first couple events I was top three, but you needed like a third and a first to win, because like I said, the stagger of
Yeah.
everybody who was in the mix and riding exceptionally well at that time was at least 10 or 12 people.
Got it.
So if I made a third, and I didn't hit another podium the rest of the year, like that was it, I was done.
That's it. Yeah.
And that's kind of where the fear creeps into the back of your head. And so I get second or third, I think, at the first Grand Prix of that year, and was feeling good and like, oh, this is great. I got this, like
Yeah.
I'm on. And the next event, that was when everything changed as far as people's tricks went, from doing 900s and 720s, and I was one of the front runners who was
Yeah.
doing 1080s originally in the early thousands, and then everybody else caught up. So somebody does something new, and then everybody catches up, and then
Right.
somebody adds something else, and then everybody catches up, and that's kind of the way that it rolls. And that's what happened, where back-to-back 1080s became like a thing. And
Got it.
I was struggling with the cab 1080, which is a fakie to forward 1080 on your toe side wall. I don't know why I was struggling with it, but I just like couldn't get it as cleanly as everybody else who then was hitting podiums were getting. And I worked so hard and busted my ass, and I don't know what it was, but I just wasn't landing them to make it a definitive win.
Yeah.
And then, funny enough, next year, like that, got it.
Right, no problem. Right.
No problem whatsoever. Oh, why was I having trouble with this?
You had something about the Olympics, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so crazy.
And that's exactly.
Yeah.
And then the next one, 2010 was when the double corks started happening. And that was another one that I wasn't, Sean White had a private mountain with millions of dollars of funding going into him learning this thing. And then everybody else just had to catch up on snow without airbags, without, safety precautions, and really struggled and catching up to get into that. And I got it at the very end, but at that point it was just too late.
Yeah. I still find not that it's not about the Olympics for me, but I still find your story very fascinating, because I think the good lesson for young athletes to hear is like, one, your career matters, whether and I did a post about this, you probably liked it, but about you're not made for medals, you're made for the process, right? And the person you become in the process of pursuing excellence. And the thing that, I had Taiba Hanif Park on here, and she's a 3-time Olympic, Olympian, volleyball. 2-time silver medalist, volleyball player. And she talks about that too, that post-Olympics depression. And it's all about like that 1 4-year event, which they talked about in the Weight of Gold. And then it's like a little bit of fanfare, everybody's excited. And then you go back to basically obscurity, and the world dies down and goes back to regular scheduled business. And then you're just like, okay, do I want to do this again? Go 4 years of this process. I mean, yes, there's competitions in between, but and so that's the challenge of like making everything about that 1 4-year event, and so you had an amazing career and inspired several people to become amazing snowboarders. And even if household Joe doesn't know your name, that doesn't matter, because so many people in the world of snowboarding do, and that's what's important, and what you inspire. But it's I know you have to tell yourself that it's not about what I say, and it's reminding yourself, because I think a lot of athletes is like, thank you, oh, that's so nice, you're right, but then it's like really go back to whatever voices are in your head. So the other thing I wanted to ask you, and just to touch on as we kind of wrap up, we've talked about this before. There was one little question, and I hope it's not too personal, but did you know the guy in the documentary that they said that died?
Steve Holcomb.
Yes.
Yeah. So like I said, during the Olympic pre-runs and leading into the Olympics, I was, certainly one of the favorites, and I had the honor of meeting him and getting to know him at the Rose Bowl parade in 2010. I think it was 2010.
Okay.
May have been 2009. I can't remember, but myself, him, there was a couple other people, and I can't remember their names, and I'm so upset that I can't remember, but Catherine Reiter, who was a speed skater in the 2010 Olympics, and I think she got a silver. And then a couple other of the World Cup skiers who were on the team. Because they choose their team previous to the snowboarders. But so it was me and several other athletes, and was able to hang out with him. We were on the Budweiser float for the Rose Bowl, and had a great couple of days hanging out in Pasadena, and a really, really awful, sad story.
Yeah.
The other athlete that I knew and didn't know extremely well, but was Speedy Peterson, who was the aerial skier, who
Mm,
he also committed suicide. And
yeah.
same kind of thing, I think just the mental health, like you don't really know or at least recognize it in your 20s.
Yeah.
You think somebody's just a character partying and doesn't really have depression issues until
Yeah.
it's too late. And that was another really awful, thing that happened.
And I know that depression is known and clinically sometimes as a, chemical imbalance and things
Hmm.
like that. And some people, just get diagnosed. But I also want to talk about what pinnacle events and then big drops cause in the brain and the body because of the dopamine hits that stop coming. And so it is something to pay attention to. Obviously, I don't know all of the mechanics of the brain, but I don't want people to think that these people were predisposed to have
Yeah.
depression and then, right, like succumbed. It was just years of like validation and feeling great and then having these highs and lows and then, just not being able to
Hmm.
handle that, because Steve was quite successful in his sport.
Yeah.
And yeah, unfortunately, eventually just was struggling in a lot of
Totally.
ways.
So the highs and lows.
Yeah, the highs and lows of the sport really, I think, is what creates the conditions. And of course, I mean, there's a lot that goes into the decision to end your life. And I'm not at all lightening it or, not saying that mental illness does not factor in, but I think it's looking at the cause, right? And the
Hmm.
cause of mental illness, because, everybody talks about mental health. And I always
Hmm.
find it very interesting when people say mental health, because what they really mean is mental illness in the
Yeah.
sense of we need to be proactively focused on our mental health so it does not become mental illness, right? But when
Right.
someone is actively working on their mental health, they typically will not devolve into mental illness. Now, there is, of course, chemical imbalances and genetic things, and that was notwithstanding. But I'm just speaking about what that idea of conditioning of this is why you see a lot of celebrities struggle from this. You see a lot
Hmm.
of big athletes struggle with this, which is just these moments of like highs and then nobody's talking about you. And so it kind of it's a struggle for a lot of athletes to cope with, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of things that happen that are kind of a bit of a commonality here are a lot of these people are on extensive winning streaks, life winning streaks, competitive winning
Yeah.
streaks. And, you kind of get used to being favored. You get used to preferential treatment when you're outside of your sport,
Yeah.
and they're like you're riding the highest of highs
Hmm.
at a young age. And I think that's the other factor that a lot of people, don't necessarily fail to realize, but don't correlate. And that is when you're in your teens and 20s, your brain is still very much
Developing.
developing,
Yeah.
and you don't have the coping skills necessary, I think, when you're at that elevated winning streak kind of level. And I think a lot of people really, really struggle with that because they're coming off of, like I said, that winning streak type of life. And then you kind of disappear and you really are having a hard time because that's a lot of people are finding themselves in that period of that life, from 19 to 25
Yeah.
or 26, whatever it is. And, if your whole life revolves around winning,
Right.
and being the top athlete of your respected sport, and you don't have much else, or if you don't have other hobbies or things that you're interested in, or whatever it is, I think
Right.
those are all factors that largely creep into those people's minds in a negative way. And
Yeah.
then when again, that age group, you really believe the world is ending, like, and I don't think it's a joke when
Yeah.
people of that age range think that way or say those
Right.
things, because to them that is real. It
Yeah.
very much is. To them, the world is ending. And
Yeah.
I don't think there's a lot of compassion from older adults, because you've made it through that period of your life, and okay, I can get through this,
Right.
like well into your 30s and 40s and such. And again, you kind of have to remember when you were 20 and you didn't
Yeah.
make the Olympics, and it was
Exactly.
the worst thing that's ever happened to you. And it just,
Right.
I think it's easy for older people to say. We were actually, I was in a clubhouse room during the Olympics
Yeah.
just a couple weeks ago, where somebody brought that up, and I was like, look, you're 40 some years old. To you, this is easy to get over, like
Yeah.
you're not really, I mean, have you ever, just to put it into another kind of perspective, like, have you ever been in a job for 6, 7 years, and then got laid off for no apparent reason that was unrelated to performance or anything, and
Right.
you literally had your entire life invested into it, and then you had to reinvent yourself to start over? I mean, if you don't have that experience, then I don't think it's really relevant for you to comment on it.
I think that is an excellent example. And I also think that's why there's that lack of compassion and empathy, because most people have not been in the shoes of a Simone Biles, a Naomi Osaka,
Right.
Steve Fisher, any of these people that have gone through these pinnacle experiences and then had to figure out how to put their lives back together. And some people just have the right confluence of events, but we know a lot of athletes come from the reason they get into sports is to escape home life or certain
Mm-hmm.
situations. So they don't always have the right support systems around them or the people that have the capability to help
Mm-hmm.
them, even if they are very loving, because like Steve said, he's a lone wolf. He's
Yeah.
probably a suffer in silence type guy. And so he's
Yeah.
not necessarily going to tell you. And so it's not
Totally.
easy to even if, right, you got bad support systems, you got good support systems, it still
Yeah.
comes down to, is that athlete being transparent? Do they feel like they can
Yeah.
talk about it? Do they feel like they can fix it themselves? So there's a lot that goes into those decisions. And I think it's really important that we're talking about this, because it isn't something that, I mean, regular people that are not athletes, that have not gone to the Olympics, that have not competed at the top end of any sport,
Mm-hmm.
experience depression, experience identity loss, experience all of those things. And using Steve's
Mm-hmm.
example is an exact thing. I've worked at this job for so many years. I can't do it anymore. Who am I if I'm not that?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what an athlete is. Like, the whole time, all the juice, all the love, all the attention, everything has been given to them through this sport. And if
Mm-hmm.
they can't do that thing, or do it, or even if they can, but they still just don't feel like they are deserving of the accolades, or, there's so many things. And it's different
Yeah.
for everybody. There's no one size
Totally.
fits all approach. So, yeah.
Yeah. And you look at it, and most of these armchair analysts, you know, grew up playing high school sports and then went to college, and a large portion of the population have the same experience of that, just kind of
Mm-hmm.
the common American trajectory of life, of school, college, job,
Mm-hmm.
marriage, children, whatever it is,
Right.
and they work a job for however long.
Right.
There's very few people in this world that are kind of athlete slash like entrepreneurial type of mentality of,
Yes.
you know just constant success and constant kind of adaptation of whatever you have to do in life to be where you want to be, and
Yeah.
not fall into the cluster of the crowd. And I just find it fascinating that people have such strong opinions, and maybe it's insecurities and such that are just being projected and
Yeah.
whatnot, of not having felt that they had the opportunity to live a lifestyle like that. And maybe it's
I
just that.
think
And
so. I think
yeah, and they're
so.
just lashing out because
Yeah.
the grass is always greener.
I have tried to think about that at length, as particularly given the Simone Biles situation that
Yeah,
happened. And I want to have you back to talk about that because we are obviously going way into overtime, but this, you and I could talk this all day.
yeah,
Uh, and so the couple things I want to talk about when you come back is
yeah,
one, transitioning out of a sport into entrepreneurship, right? Because a lot of
of course.
athletes kind of struggle with that, as well as exactly what we're talking about. Why do we feel like the psychology of the fan, right? And what that impact has on the athlete as well as the fan themselves and that sort of
Hmm.
relationship with the sport. Uh, my last question to you, before we go into the rapid fire fun questions, because we don't want to end on anything gloom doom, right?
Sure.
Uh, you, well, I have two questions for you. The IOC, or you have spoken before about it, and I want to give you
Hmm.
an opportunity to speak to it now. What is your challenge with the way that they handle things, or what would you like to see change that would support the sport better or athletes better?
Yeah. So, like we talked about in Clubhouse a few times, I think, again, it's very Olympic organizations are not dedicated to athletes, in my opinion. I think
Mm-hmm.
that, um, they offer the cookie cutter version outwardly to the public as to, they're bringing in all these athletes and they're housing
Mm-hmm.
all these successful athletes with their facility, their coaching, and all
Yeah.
that stuff. But at the same time, it's, at least in my instance, it was not that way. I grew up, like I said, in Minnesota. I had my own club team. That's where I developed my skills. That's where I worked with
Right.
the coach who helped me become better, look at all the technicality
Right.
of snowboarding and all that sort of thing. And then you make it to a certain level, and then they are like, "Oh yeah, you're one of us," and
Yeah.
we did this. And I just think it's really fascinating, because they really don't provide a ton to
Yeah.
athletes. And I'm not entirely certain. I can't speak to all sports,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
with U.S. snowboarding, don't get me wrong. Again, I was very appreciative, and I think it is a good program. But for me being a quote unquote fully funded athlete, a team level rider for almost a decade,
Yeah.
and doing all sorts of fundraising events for them, and literally, they were one of my sponsors, so
Yeah.
keeping them happy, keeping good relationships, that whole deal, and then really just kind of paying for travel.
Yeah.
When I don't know,
Yeah.
there's just a lot of
Yeah.
inconsistencies, and when CEO level people and executive level people at that organization are making a million plus per year, and people at the IOC who are making high $100,000 a year annually just to I don't know, have this thing on autopilot.
Yeah. I
I don't
think
know.
it's, I think, no, I think you're highlighting something really important that we've been dancing around in, not just in IOC. Obviously, that's an amateur situation
Hmm.
in most instances. So they are, uh, like, you have to sign a contract just to go into the competition for the
Hmm.
Olympics. Because I remember Natalie telling me about that. Like, you have to sign something that says, if you make the Olympic team, here's what the qualifications are and things like that.
Hmm.
So that's also interesting. But you're basically giving up all rights to any kind of like royalties, like whatever. You're not, they own you during the Olympics. So that's
Right.
also interesting. But
Yes.
then you go over to the other organizations and they seem athlete centric, but I think it's the same. I think it's
Hmm.
all a profit machine. And I think that's why we need to have conversations, because the athletes, which is why we have NIL now, which I'm sure we can talk about as
Hmm.
well. But the fact that we're starting to, and I'm not saying NIL is for the athlete. I know that that's the
Sure.
idea, but it's really sponsors just trying to get at these college athletes sooner.
Hmm.
But it will benefit the athlete. But it's
Hmm.
important that we keep the focus of the health of the athlete and the importance of the athlete center, most, because it's all done, like you said, to appear a certain way.
Hmm.
And I think we have to make sure that whoever is involved continues to advocate for the athlete, which is at the end of the day, the product, the actual face, not the organization, right? I mean, the NBA is nothing without its athletes. The MLB is nothing without its athletes, and so on and so forth. So but who makes the most money? The owner.
Yep. Always. I mean, even in NBA, even in the NFL, the owners still make way more money. I mean, hand over fist than anybody. And, while I use those as examples because I do think that they are on the right track. And I think the thing that's significantly missing, in especially Olympic sports, is collective bargaining and revenue sharing. And I think that's where everything falls short, because the way that it works in the U.S. is we are not a government-funded Olympic program like every other country.
Every other country.
Yeah, every other country is funded by their government. We have a military budget. They have Olympic budgets. And, it all comes from private donors, which is something that a lot of people don't know or understand. That, even with Simone Biles this year, I heard people comment saying, like, the government owes me money back for her not competing in this. And, it's just so beyond ridiculous that A, you feel that way, and B, you don't even know that the government doesn't fund our athlete programs. And so
I did not
the way that it works,
said things like that. That's insane.
Yeah. So the way that it works is, private donors, largely U.S. based corporations and high net individuals, donate to USOC and USSA.
So they're a nonprofit.
And they are a nonprofit. That's correct.
I did not know that.
Yes. Yeah. So they're all technically 501c or whatever nonprofits, and that's where they go. So Google, Yahoo, back early thousands, was a massive donor for USSA. A lot of people in Palo Alto area, a lot of tech people, a lot of, like I said, high net individuals in whatever area that are just very eccentric about sports and looking to help fund a program, also to reduce taxes, and all those things kind of combined into the pool of funding that goes to a U.S.
Yeah, I was going to say those donations are about tax write-offs. So yeah.
Yeah, and what they do is so the USOC has a giant facility down in Colorado Springs, which was funded with private money being donated. USSA has a giant facility in Park City, which was funded by all the donors. And, hey, look, we made you this, and this is your building that you did for these athletes, and the athletes have access to the building, but, it just kind of like, again, the amount of money that goes in, and it pays for the whole machine. It pays for all the workers and all the interns and people who are working, entry-level positions for 5 years and struggling to make rent and all that sort of thing. And, a few people at the top are making all the money.
That's a definitely valuable perspective. And I think goes back to the mental health conversation and so much, because it's like, again, you're doing so much. And like you said, you're fundraising for them. You're doing so much, and yet they're not giving you anything really other than paying for travel to these events. But, which is, that means something, but it's not what it could be. And I mean, I'm sure there's someone that can argue the merits without me knowing enough about the intricacies of it, of the difference between a government funded program, because let's just look at U.S. women's national team soccer, for example. Like, the other countries don't have the same development of their soccer teams because they're government funded. So there is something to be said for having a federation that can, even if they're not paying you equally and things like that. Although I do agree with equal pay. I'm highlighting the differences just to look at, like, making sure that, again, it has to be, whether it's the government paying for it or a privately funded organization, it's about making sure the athletes are being taken care of. And that's why Steve's talking about collective bargaining and revenue sharing, because It's not necessarily the government has to take it over. It just needs to be something that helps the athletes out more and takes this from a profit machine for the few to a share of for the many that are actually making the sport profitable. So absolutely. And I'm glad we're talking about this. My last question that I always ask all my guests, what is your mental advantage? What do you think is the thing that helps you have a mental advantage in a sport or in life or in life?
Oh, that is a good question. And I really can't pinpoint it to one thing specifically. I just think it's my whole trajectory of life, so to speak, as like we talked about before, the repetition of sport and competition, learning how to fall, adaptability, being able to pivot quickly, like we didn't quite get into super heavily, but when things ended for me, they ended very abruptly, and I had to pull up my boots and figure life out very quickly outside of snowboarding. So I think it's not being overly afraid to try new things and just put it out there.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, time for the rapid fire questions.
Awesome.
And definitely going to have you back because we needed to talk about you transitioning out of the sport, but we got into some other things.
That's okay.
For sure. Because I want to talk about that because that transition out is so important. Okay, First question. These are very serious questions, Steve. So
perfect. I'm a very serious guy.
What is your favorite snack?
Favorite snack? As a kid, I would tell you probably something junk foody. But now that I'm, a recovering athlete, I stick to things on the more healthy side. I would probably say bananas are my go-to.
I love a banana. I have a banana like every day. But are you like me? Okay, so question about the banana since you brought it up. Hasn't been talked about on the podcast before. I like a crisp banana. I do not like them soft or soggy or any of that. Like I'm a mushy. Like when it becomes mushy, I'm not a fan.
So I'm probably like maybe a day past crisp.
Okay.
All right. So like starting to soften, but not.
I think I'm right there too, because I've definitely had them where I've had them too soon and they're like not good at all.
Yes.
So I'm like not too green, just getting into the yellow, and it's nice, but not to the point where it's starting to get the brown. Exactly. The brown is usually where it's starting. But turns out, just for those of you that are nutrition people that might attack us, more nutrients in the banana when it's got the brown than when it's got the green. So I do know that, but I still don't like it as much. All right. Nice. Favorite flavor of ice cream?
Ooh, I would say, so there's this place near us that does a blackberry lavender, and that's probably my all-time favorite.
Okay, what is the name of the place for anyone that lives in Colorado that doesn't know about this place?
It's over in Vail, and it's a place called Sunday.
Okay, you need to go to Sunday and get blackberry lavender. That sounds delicious. I'm not really a fruity ice cream person, but I would want to try it because those two flavors together just sound like it would be so good. Okay, superpower you would always want. Now, you used to fly in half pipes, but you tell me, what is your superpower that you've always wanted and why?
Definitely flight. As a child growing up with Superman, everything, that was always just kind of my one little wish that I could one day fly. Again, snowboarding was the closest I could get to that, but that's amazing. If I could just blast off and, go somewhere
the height you guys get above those half pipes is amazing. So, I mean, and the fact that you have the confidence to land those skills. Yeah. I mean, come on.
Okay. That's the difficulty.
Yes, exactly. Now, you already mentioned him, so I'm assuming Superman was your favorite guy?
Yes. I was, as a kid, Superman and Batman were comic book heroes that I was into, and then,
Are you a Superman or a Batman person? Because I'm a Superman person.
Okay. I would say I was probably more drawn to Batman just because when Tim Burton's film Batman came out in 1991 or 89, whatever it was.
Was that Michael Keaton?
Yes.
The first one? Okay, yeah.
The first one, yeah. I loved that movie. I thought it was the coolest movie of all time. And, being a 8-year-old, I think at that time or
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was,
Okay. All right. A lot of people like Batman. I've got some theories on why, but we won't go into them.
okay.
Anyway, I just feel like people think they could be Batman more than they feel like they could be Superman because he's an alien from another planet. Batman's
Probably.
this rich guy that,
Yeah,
so it's just like, oh yeah, Batman, everybody, I think more people like Batman for that reason, but I'm Superman all the way. So I don't know.
totally.
All right. Other question. This one is some people feel passionate about it. You may have no thought to it at all. Toilet paper. Everybody has it in their house. Do you like it over the top or under the bottom?
Oh, over the top. Yeah. Yeah.
And do you change it if it is wrong at your house?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll even change it if it's wrong at other people's houses.
That was the next question. There's some people that do, some people that don't. Okay, yes, I know. Like, wait, I'm not comfortable taking this off the roll in anyone's house like this. So, okay,
See,
all right.
I'm a prankster. I don't really care. Yeah.
You just like to change it. Okay.
I'll do that.
And,
I'll also move things in people's pantries,
oh, so you are okay. That's
Yeah.
what I was gonna ask. Is bathroom snoopers are also common. They like to go through. Yeah, that sounds like fun. Okay, so just be
Yeah.
mindful if you invite Steve over to your house. He's a little bit of a prankster, so pay attention. Your favorite, your personal hero.
I can't name anyone.
Okay.
I really respect and admire a lot of different people. Actually, most everybody, because
Yeah.
everybody has a very unique life and story in their own way and
I love
overcome
that.
challenges that they've never thought possible. So I'm just kind of an overall encompassing admirer of many.
Love that. And
Yeah.
I think that's a good point. Why do you have to choose one, right? You can take
Yeah.
little things from each person. There's always these
Yeah.
wonderful qualities that we kind of like, oh, I want to be like that, or I love that about that person. So absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's no perfect person,
Yeah.
You're striving to be, but it doesn't
Yeah.
exist. So.
Hello, right. Never put anyone's head higher than yours is what the Buddhists say, because
Yeah.
if you put a man on a pedestal, he most likely will fall off that pedestal at some point.
Yeah, I like
Man or
that.
woman. Sorry, anyone on a pedestal. Last question. Who is, no, that's not, it's not a who. What do you want to be remembered for?
Ooh, I think mostly just for being a kind, good person. Somebody who's fair and honest, but I wouldn't mind people reminding me for previous accomplishments in life and all that sort of stuff too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
Steve, how can we connect with you? And what do you want? Anything you want us to connect with you for? What are you working on now? And how can we connect with you?
Yeah, so after snowboarding, I got into real estate. I'm now a licensed real estate agent and a real estate developer in Colorado. And you can connect with me on any and all social media. Instagram, it's Steve Fisher Mountain Homes. I know that's long, but you'll find
We'll
it.
put it in the show notes. So for sure.
Nice. Twitter is Stephen H. Fisher, and then Facebook, you just search my name, but I'm on a private Facebook, but
Okay.
You can still get at me that way. But yeah, so since snowboarding, I've been fortunate to get into real estate and help people buy and sell properties in Summit County, Breckenridge, mostly Colorado.
Nice.
I started a new company called Range Design Company with some friends, and we design and build custom homes here in the mountains in Vail and Breckenridge, Summit County, Eagle County, kind of all over. We are delving into kind of a new concept of a small luxury cabin kind of
Nice.
product to where I'm sure everybody knows real estate is completely bonkers everywhere right now.
Yes.
So what we're trying to do is service the need of a smaller, more efficient home that's not $1 million.
So it's like
Yeah.
a tiny house for a cabin.
Kind
No,
of.
I'm just kidding. I'm just
Yeah, not quite tiny.
not
but,
quite. Right. Can I get
yeah.
a snowboard run with my house?
Yes, actually, that would be absolutely. I offer that to all my clients.
Okay, I figured. I was like, just in case. So, all right.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Please connect with Steve if you're listening, if you found value from this. I know you did, because there's
Yeah.
a lot of great things that we talked about. Thank you so much, Steve. This was such a great conversation.
Yeah, this was fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.